Talk French continues at 4, checking out the famous soup bouillabaisse. That's followed by France Inside Out. Meet 3 individuals at different stages of their careers in the health and care sector at 5, how they got there and how they intend to move forward. Back with the OU from 6 and a trip to the island of Dominica and the role of nude models in art. The Art of Knowledge, BBC Learning Zone.
Now, would you like to tell us about yourself? What's your problem?
I'm in a dilemma as to whether to kill my children to get revenge on Jason or spare them. Well, what am I to do?
Now, the monosyllables are incredibly powerful, but they're bigger than anything else, monosyllables. They carry more meaning than long words. Kill, love, sex, death. They tend to be monosyllabic. So even when they're short words like it or I is a very good one. You can't take them on all together in a cluster.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, what am I to do? Women, my courage has all gone. Oh, my heart. Don't do it. Oh, miserable heart. Let them be. Spare your children. We'll all live safely in Athens and they will make you happy. No. No, no! By all the fiends of hate in hell's depths, no! I will not leave sons of mine to become the victims of my enemy's rage. In any case, there is no escape. The thing's done now. Yes, now, the golden coronet is on her head. The royal bride is in her dress, dying, I know it. And children's skin is soft and their breath pure. Go. Go away, I can't look at you any longer. My pain is more than I can bear. I understand the horror of what I am to do. But anger, the spring of all life's horror, masters my resolve.
Good. What's the most important line in that?
I understand the horror of what I am to do, I think.
I understand the horror of what I have to do. Good. Okay, could we just borrow that leather jacket? Could that be the great gift? Would you be the princess? And I want you, when you hear it, the mention of that coat, to die in real agony. The 2 sons, they are both Jason's. They look identical to him. Could you just play, just for the sake of it, I just have to see it, that you hate them. You never like them. Okay, I'm going to do something horrid to you first. Would you run around here twice and start the speech on a run?
Where my courage is all gone! Their young, bright faces. I can't do it. I'll think no more of it. I'll take them away from Corinth. In any case, there is no escape. The thing's done now. Yes, now the golden coronet is on her head. The royal bride is in her dress, dying, I know it. So since I have a sad road to travel, and send my sons on a still sadder road, I'll speak to them. Come, children, give me your hand. Dear son, yours too. Now we must say goodbye. My darling hand and darling mouth. Dear sons, my blessing on you both. But there, not here. Here all blessing your father has destroyed. sweet to hold you. And children's skin is soft, and their breath is pure.
Now I want you to take away a couple of things. We have a tendency sometimes to play the thing that is comfortable. You must head towards the discomfort. The point of these plays is that they're wound up like clockwork, and they release on the tension of that, not on any relaxation. So that in a way, if you feel comfortable or pleasure for any moment, you're on the wrong wicket. She's relieved she's killed the princess, but there is no pleasure in it. Right. Seeing the princess dying in that writhing agony, and having you say, "This pain, I cannot bear it." Your pain has to be worse than hers.
Right.
If her pain was only to die, then you would die. But you're in a far greater agony than that. And that's why I wanted you not to like the boys, is that in some way, then they belong to him. They're not easier to kill because you hate them. In a way, they're harder to kill because you hate them. But to love them is only to sentimentalize their death, you see. Mm. If you love them, you go, "Poor darlings, I'm sorry I have to do this." I just think it doesn't help you in this instance. You're definitely right in hearing that the language is released in a high plane, isn't it? It's a high octane, high voltage. Extremis is what it is, really. I mean, your big line in it, I think, is, "All my strength is gone." Mm. So with that in mind, we're going to tie you up. I think she's more that state than she is Miss Triumphant. Okay. And just help her on her walk. She tends to go for a walk when she's thinking. Okay. Great, now give us the text. That's much better. That's where we are.
What am I to do? Women, my courage is all gone. They're young, bright faces. I can't do it.
It's not that you can't take the M25 because it's packed. Very good. Go for a walk if you like. They'll take you. They're lovely. They're with you. See, they are your last remaining strength. These beautiful boys. Keep moving because you're in trouble.
What am I to do?
We don't give a sugar, frankly.
Women, my courage is all gone. They're young, bright faces. I can't...
Whose young, bright faces?
They're young,
yes.
Bright faces.
Excellent.
I can't do it. I'll think no more of it. Why should I hurt them? To make their father suffer. When I shall suffer twice as much myself.
Very good. Why? Because you would then have nobody to carry you around. I'm only saying physicalize each thought so that, you're rather than thinking it, but each person is a thought. Why should you do it? Because then you could be free of them. Be free of them, you can't walk. Get them back, let them go. Kill them, then unkill them.
Oh, what am I to do? Women, my courage is all gone. They're young, bright faces. I can't do it.
No, you must do it in order to not do it. Do it, do it.
I can't.
Do it, no, do it. Kill them. How would you kill them? That's it.
I can't do it.
No, you must do it first. You hadn't done it.
I can't do it. I'll think no more of it. I'll take them away from Corinth. Why should I hurt them?
Off you go then. You say.
Why should I hurt them? To make their father suffer. When I shall suffer twice as much myself.
Okay, I'm going to stop you. Very good. But why should you do it? Is it just one thought to make their father suffer? Isn't the reply? Why should I do it?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
So do it all. Live it all out. It's very good.
Why should I do it? To make their father suffer! When I shall suffer twice as much myself. I won't do it. I won't think of it again. What is the matter with me? Are my enemies to laugh at me? Am I to let them off scot-free? I I must steel myself to it. What a coward I am, even tempting my own resolution with soft talk. Boys, go indoors. And if there be any here who think it not lawful to be present at my sacrifice, let him see to it. My hand shall not weaken. Oh, my heart. Don't do it. Oh, miserable heart. Let them be. Spare your children. We'll all live together, safely in Athens, and they'll make me happy. No. No. No! By all the fiends of hate in hell's depths, no! I'll not leave sons of mine to become the victims of mine enemy's rage. In any case, the thing is done now. Yes, now. The golden coronet is on her head. The royal bride is in her dress. Dying, I know it. So since I have a sad road to travel, and send my sons on a still sadder road, I'll speak to them. Come, children! Give me your hand. Dear son, yours too. Darling hand and darling mouth, your noble childlike face and body. Dear sons, my blessing on you both. But there, not here. Oh, blessing here, your father has destroyed. How sweet to hold you. Children's skin is soft and their breath pure. Go. Go away. I can't bear to look at you. My pain is more than I can bear. I understand the horror of what I am to do. But anger, the spring of all life's horror, masters my resolve.
What is your problem, the two of you? Have you a problem with each other?
Oh, big one. I've got 2 children for him.
Yeah.
I'm married to him.
Yeah.
And he's gone hankering after power and fame and ignored me and got himself another wife.
Poor woman does not understand the concept of career, a family, really, and has been herring around the palace like a harpy.
He has hurt me deeply and abandoned me as though he never knew me at all.
You no doubt hate me, but I could never bear ill will to you.
You filthy coward. If I knew a worse name for such unmanliness, I'd use it. So you've come. You, my worst enemy, come to me. Ah, it's not courage, this looking friends in the face after betraying them. It's not even audacity. It's a disease, the worst a man could have. Pure shamelessness.
Okay, could we just have this table out? Would you get 2 chairs and sit behind the table? Okay, who would like to play the new princess? Okay, maybe, actually, would you go between them? Can you say, Jason, after every line, I want to go to bed with you, to your wife, new wife, or I want to kill you to Medea, whichever you want. That's all really that matters, isn't it? You want to kill one and go to bed with the other. Can you say, I love you, before every line you say?
So you're banished. However, I will not desert a friend. I want to go to bed with you. I have come, in spite of everything, to see that you and the children are not sent away with an empty purse. I want to kill you, or unprovided. Exile brings with it a train of difficulties. I want to go to bed with you. You no doubt hate me. I want to kill you. But I could never bear any ill will to you. I want to go to bed with you.
I love you. You filthy coward. I love you. If I'd known a worse name for such unmanliness, I'd use it. I love you. So you've come. You, my worst enemy, come to me. I love you. I'll begin at the beginning. When you were sent to master the fire-breathing bulls, I love you. Yoke them and sow the deep furrows. I love you. Then I saved your life. I love you. And that, every Greek who sailed with you on the Argos knows. I love you. Do you think that the old gods no longer rule? I love you. And that new laws are in force? I love you. You must know you're guilty of perjury to me. I love you.
Now, what effect does it have on you two?
I feel like slapping her.
Her? Mm-hmm. Saying this line, was that making that worse or better? The I love you.
The I love you was weakening me. I tried to drum up the vengeance and the hatred and the bile, but the I love you kept weakening my heart.
It's upsetting to hear about my heroic deeds being done by a woman instead, or having been kind of second-guessed.
She paid the bills, she paid the tax bill.
Yeah.
She paid the gas bill.
That's so
she
much
bought
fun.
all the groceries.
Not sure if I want the new girl
exactly.
to hear, right?
Yeah. That's very good. Yeah. So that is another key to it, absolutely. I know what I want to do, but I'm terrified of doing it in case somebody gets hurt.
No, that's quite all right. I don't mind hurting somebody.
I have a big coat. That do any good?
Would that be good? Yeah. Don't worry, because Jason is going to protect you. You won't have any blows unless Jason weakens.
Who's trying to kill who?
Yes,
I'm trying to kill you.
Oh, but that's the bad news.
Oh, yeah. It's waking up.
The bad news, Jenny, is that you represent the new world.
Right.
He has to work. If one blow lands on your new girl, as we discover later in the play, it does, she's a goner.
Think yourself lucky to be let off with banishment. I have tried all the time to calm them down, but you would not give up your ridiculous tirades against the royal family. So you're banished. However, I would not desert a friend.
But you turn up, it's going to be heavy, it's going to be bad, but you never had any idea it was going to be this bad. So it's not the scene you wanted to play, because you can't come well out of it. I know this thing is in translation, but what is good is that you get at least the sense like the royal family becomes incredibly pompous. I'm not saying you should play it pompously, but I began to hear things that I hadn't heard, which is, you really shouldn't treat the Clintons like that, it's not on. That jumps out when you're preoccupied with what is real. If you could just get that witch into the chair, it'll be fine. It's not language and fighting. It's language to fight.
You no doubt hate me, but I could never bear ill will to you.
You filthy coward! If I knew a worse name for such unmanliness, I'd use it.
Medea, if you get anywhere near a killer.
I will. I'll begin at the beginning. When you were sent to master the fire-breathing bulls, yoke them and sow the deep furrows. Then I saved your life, and every Greek that sailed with you on the Argus knows. The serpent that kept watch over the golden fleece, coiled round it, fold on fold, and sleeping. It was I who killed it and lit the torch for your success. I willingly deceived my father, left my home, and with you came to Ilokas by Mount Pelion, showing much love and little wisdom. Yes! Yes! There I put King Peleus to the most horrible of deaths at his own daughter's hands, and ruined his entire house. And in return, you have the wickedness to turn me out and get yourself another wife! Yes!
It's uglier, isn't it? Much uglier than you thought.
I was quite surprised that he was able to contain me. I was quite surprised that he was able to catch me at all my moves.
Were you? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you were quick. You did very well over there.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes, you were
But
off.
he caught me just
When you were going to kill her.
Yeah.
Yeah. You immediately do seem very, very outside them. Yeah. And you seem incredibly intimate with him. Mm-hmm. Something to do with not hitting him back is because you're not frightened that it's his arms around, you know them.
Yes.
There's no relief in it.
No. There's none.
And it's good it's early in the play. But purely just on the language alone, it is fascinating just to see that stiltedness between the two. Stiltedness and yet intimacy. It's both, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Because at the moment of high anger, you can't just say, and you didn't feed the cat yesterday. Everything has a sort of epic. People start saying, and you've always, and 30 years ago you always, things you might never have referred to in life. You didn't say every day, darling, thank me, I saved your life with the serpent. It's this checks and balances that people forget about in order to get on with lives, that sit waiting to be scooped up at these moments.
I just kept feeling like he was liquid papering me out.
Absolutely.
The word banishment just seemed to put another stroke of liquid paper on me. And so I had to get bigger than that to make him realize I'm here and I did so much for you. But
yeah.
It just didn't matter.
Magic is other people's rituals, that's all it is. Magic is the other person's world. Medea's an outsider because she is a foreigner, and because of magic. My feeling is that they're possibly the same thing. I want you to take something to do with the world that you're from and put it now into the speech. Something that his world could not have, that your world had. And it's around the area of the gods, because, of course, this is the thing you need to communicate to us. It's something specific from your memory.
As you said, gods, I remember a ritual that we have at home where someone goes down on what we call the mourning ground. It's a sort of a baptism into a religion. It's a moment when a person faces their inner demons and their loved ones have to be around them while they're blindfolded and covered in earth. And drums are playing and songs are singing. So your loved ones really save you through the moment. And when you said gods, it reminded me of that, going on the mourning ground. And maybe I was the one who was there for him when he could have lapsed into oblivion and not regained consciousness. I don't know. That might be too much.
No, this is bang on. This is bang on. Now I'm trying to think about what exercise we can do to make that occur. So we either blindfold him. Yeah, let's do that. It's very good then, even for us, in the neutral audience, to hear about a ritual that, of course, we can't know, but we know existed between them. So what we're doing really is we're expressionistically living out his memory of it at that moment. What I'd love you to do is to begin it as angrily as you began when you were very angry, and go through that ritual while you speak, because really your magic begins after there I left my home. So take us back there.
So you've come. You, my worst enemy, come to me. Oh, it's not courage. It's looking friends in the face after betraying them. It's not even audacity. It's a disease, the worst any man could have. pure shamelessness. However, it's as well you came. To say what I have to say would ease my heart. To hear it said will make you wince. I'll begin at the beginning. When you were sent to master the fire-breathing bulls, yoke them and sow the deep furrows, then I saved your life. And that every Greek who sailed with you on the Argos knows. The serpent that kept watch over the golden fleece, coiled round it fold and fold on sleeping. It was I who killed it. I lit the torch for your success. I willingly deceived my father, left my home, and with you came Trilocus by Mount Pelion, showing much love and little wisdom. There I put King Peleus to the most horrible of deaths at his own daughter's hands, and ruined his entire house. And in return, you have the wickedness to turn me out and get yourself a new wife after I'd borne you sons. If you had still been childless, I could have pardoned you for hankering after this new marriage. But respect for oaths have gone to the wind. Do you, I wonder, think that the old gods no longer rule, and that new laws are now in place? You must know you're guilty of perjury to me.
There was something that united the language and what was going on, that made that ritual and what was being said the most private and intimate and tiny thing in the world. She was talking about burning houses and killing children, and it sounded like she was saying, like the way I tickled your feet, or remember we had spaghetti bolognese last night, or there was something so intimate and gentle about it, and private. It was just a great impression of her body on mine, interacting with mine.
Well, because you were in her world. She was in charge, in her world. I mean, the woman we've just met, like a screaming wild thing, is not this woman. This woman in her world is completely in control and beautiful. She's taken him home to where they were when they first met. Oh, one word, one memory, and they're back there. And that's very powerful. He's beaten by her memory.
It's an intoxication he fears. And he knows he can get sucked into. And she knows it too.
What can she offer him here?
She can't offer him anything.
That's right.
And it enrages her, because she knows that if they were somewhere else, she would be able to get some leverage.
In fact, he's not at home either, you know. This isn't his country either.
No, but he's found a way. And he's found a way without her after they've gone through so much together.
It's a terribly sad
It's
situation.
awful, isn't it? I mean, I can understand her killing her children. Yes, I can. I thoroughly agree with her.
He has wiped away the past, so she wipes it. He can't keep the benefit of the past.
She won't stop living in agony anyway. And in the end of the book, she says, you know, she's glad she did it just to wipe that smile off his face.
Myth meets music in half an hour on BBC Learning Zone, when Judith Weir discusses how Scottish folklore has influenced her compositions. First, back to Medea and the tensions between the conventions of ancient and modern performances.
Come, lay your plan, Medea. Scheme with all your skill onto the deadly moment that shall test your nerve.
One of the myths about the use of myth in Greek theatre is that they were all fixed, that they had a kind of Robert Graves or an encyclopedia, they go and look it up, and there was a fixed version of the myth, and then the poor old dramatist had to sit down and make a play out of that. It's not like that at all. Myths were very variable. They were told in many different ways and told in many different forms. There was no such thing as a fixed version of the myth. We know that there were stories of Medea, of course, of her going off with Jason, of her coming to Corinth, and there were even stories of the death of her children. But it doesn't look as if before Euripides, Medea herself killed the children. So Euripides has taken that raw material and made the absolutely vital, crucial change of having Medea, the mother herself, kill her own children. Now, for us now, that is the essence of the Medea story, of course, that she's the woman who kills her own children. But Euripides was innovating, he was changing. And I think this flexibility, this reminder that the raw material can be changed, can be seen in a different way, can be told in a different way, is a kind of model for modern productions. That we have the basic material, but we're always turning it, we're always trying to see it from a different angle, we're always trying to tell the story in a different way.
Although the myth of Medea who kills her children appears very simple, in fact, the way that her myth has been received since the Middle Ages and since the Medea was first printed in the Renaissance is rather a complicated story. It seems to me that it offers an extremely rich and complex number of possible emotional interpretations within it, and I think that's one of the secrets of this myth's longevity.
In staging Medea, we may feel instinctively that we should be authentic. But what would a so-called authentic production involve?
I'm not quite sure what an authentic approach to producing Greek tragedy today really means. I mean, after all, your audience is never going to be authentic. Your audience is not an audience of 5th century Athenians, it's an audience of today. Therefore, it seems to me, however you do the play, it's got to be a way that is effective to today's audience, that speaks to today's audience. But that's not actually to say that you just completely rewrite it in modern terms, that you turn Medea into a psychodrama, for example. Because if the plays of the past are worth putting on at all, then there are things in them that are different from today's preoccupations as well as the same as today's preoccupations. And I think that's the way I would see the value for a modern-day producer of thinking about the way it was originally produced. You can go and stand in the very spot in Athens, in the Theatre of Dionysus, beneath the Acropolis, where Euripides' Medea and all the other great tragedies of the great era of tragedy in the 5th century BC were first put on. And you can stand and look around there and say, this is exactly where it was. On the other hand, because it was the original theatre, it was a kind of place of pilgrimage, and so it got rebuilt again and again and again. So what you are actually surrounded by as you stand in the Theatre of Dionysus is remains spread over about 700 years of people coming along and saying, I think I'll reconstruct it a bit, I think I'll change it a bit. So that hardly a single stone that you see was standing on the spot where it is now when Euripides' Medea was first put on.
In that case, what did the space Medea was played in actually look like? About 75 miles from Athens is the theatre at Epidaurus. It was built some years after Euripides' death, and we don't know for sure that Medea was performed here. But we do know that this theatre was not rebuilt and shows all the main features of the kind of space Euripides wrote for. There's a slope where the audience sat, and at the bottom of the slope, the large circular area known as the orchestra. Though the modern word orchestra comes from this, Here it originally meant a place for dancing. It's where the chorus and sometimes the actors perform. At the far side of the orchestra is the stage building, or skene. Not much of this survives, but using a fragment of a vase painting, we can recreate what it might have been like. And finally, the side roads, called the parodoi. It was here that many of the entrances and exits took place. This is basically the stage space for all the tragedies of the 5th century. And here too we have all the elements of a Greek theatre: seats, orchestra, stage building. But this isn't Greece, it's rural Berkshire. Carved out of a chalk pit in the 1890s, this theatre has been in continual use by the staff and students of Bradfield College for the performance of Greek tragedies. Is this one possible authentic approach?
Emois der ton oletron fulgen ectes de ges.
Uton, panton, teon, promon, halion.
Right, let's stop there, okay. And you're going straight into Harleon. We get this lovely rhythm. Okay, so can we try that, please, from Harleon? 1, 2.
Harleon, epe atios aphilos hotipumaton oloimon. Phronesin eiton deco. Alamoi tusmoro gaftinu satruke lema. Kai tade kakois, frasatse tois palai taprosphon.
All our plays are performed in ancient Greek, which might seem a bit odd given that most of our cast don't speak it, and certainly most of the audience don't. But the Greek language itself has, such a resonance and makes such a gorgeous noise when it's spoken on stage. I mean, the language fairly fizzes and cracks along.
At autoin,
Nike!
kaitis and logos.
Another reason why we do it in Greek is because it makes Bradfield unique as being the only place where you can see a Greek play in ancient Greek in a Greek theatre setting.
Doing these things in ancient Greek is fun. Students love it. I think everybody who's interested in Greek tragedy should try and get to see one, at least, in their lifetime. Having said that, I feel that if we're going to reproduce the role of these plays in society, doing them in a good, clear and awe-inspiring translation, and emotionally and spiritually affecting translation into our own language, is much more likely to make us understand what these plays meant to the ancients. And I'm a great advocate of performance in modern translation.
Still, you can treat me like a woman who's witless. My heart's made of steel, and as I have stated, whether you like it or not, there's Agamemnon. This is the sword hand that brought him to blood rights. I hacked down my husband.
I would say, give your actors time to work with an English version, to work with the expressiveness of something in our own language. But I could see at the same time there is a problem of translation. I mean, Medea actually has not been I can't think of a really good translation of Medea that I could really strongly recommend. It's not like with the Oresteia, where Peter Hall managed to get Tony Harrison to produce a uniquely special and powerful translation for that production.
Now you're ready with banishment, exile, the people's hatred and public damnation. And how did you punish this murderer here? Meant as little to him as slaughtering cattle. His sheepfolds were bursting. He butchered his she-child, the she-child I laboured to launch on her life lot as some specious godsop to settle a storm squall. You should have banished him for pollution. But it's now that you start to play at stern judges.
Even though it's a translation, the use of stylized English might help us get closer to the spirit of the original text. And there are other so-called authentic elements here too. A large chorus, masks, and an all-male cast, as they would have been in Euripides' day.
I've seen some very successful modern professional productions of Greek tragedy which have taken one or two of the conventions of the ancient theatre which are not commonly used in the modern Western theatre anyway, and use them to very great effect in the modern theatre. One is to take just the mask, and I think that some of the Peter Hall productions with their beautiful masks have very successfully brought out the estranging effect of the mask, that somehow the actor behind it, his own identity, is submerged, and by the very simple act of putting on a mask, certain kinds of different movements come about, certain more stylised and more, if you like, universally readable gestures.
If you go for a larger, more stylised acting style, such as ancient Greek tragedies must have had, if you just think of the size of the theatre, that alone tells you, you can't deal with tiny little gestures. Whereas in film, of course, the tiniest little twitch of a hand or twitch of an eyelid can speak volumes. But we're not dealing with that kind of theatre.
We can see the logic of this. A large space requires big gestures. Men playing women might need to be masked. But what's the historical evidence?
I once showed to a colleague who works in Shakespeare studies some of the vase paintings that are related to the Greek theatre. And he said, my God, if only we got evidence like that for the Shakespearean theatre, we'd know so much more than we do. We've got quite a lot of vases that are interestingly related to the Greek theatre. As well as the archaeological evidence, there's another very important kind of evidence for the kind of experience and the kind of visual picture that Greek tragedy presented, and that's comedy. Comedy is fascinated with the theatre, it's fascinated with itself, and it's fascinated with tragedy, which is its kind of older, serious sister. And never hesitates to make fun of tragedy, to exploit tragedy. And it also likes to take the mickey out of staging aspects of tragedy. There were two rather curious bits of machinery that tragedy developed, and which comedy liked to make fun of. One is a kind of trolley, a kind of floor on wheels that was rolled out of the door in order to reveal terrible scenes of what had happened inside. It's a kind of revelation trolley, and out it would come with corpses and scenes of terrible slaughter on it. Comedy can't resist having people wheeled out on this trolley. There's a play in which somebody comes to visit Euripides and says, come outside and see me, Euripides. And Euripides says, I'm sorry, I'm too busy writing plays. And so he says, all right, get yourself wheeled out on the trolley. So that's a way Euripides can come outside and still be at his writing desk. Another piece of machinery that to us may seem even more absurd was a crane. They just call it the machine, which lifted characters up above the scene building. I say characters, but it's almost entirely for the use of gods, because that area above the scene is the area of the gods. It's the upper air. Now, when Jason comes rushing to the palace and is told that Medea has killed the children, he says, open the doors so that I can see this terrible, villainous woman, this terrible, awful sight. And that is a cue for this trolley to be rolled out, and the audience must be expecting the scene of Medea standing there among her dead children. And instead what happens is that this crane, the mechane in Greek, is brought into use. And instead of appearing in the doorway, Medea appears above in the chariot of her grandfather, the sun.
This historic performance of Medea successfully combined some of the traditional elements of the Greek theatre with stylised features of the Japanese kabuki tradition.
One of the advantages in going to see a Greek tragedy, either in ancient Greek or in a language like, say, Japanese, that one doesn't actually understand, is that one has to focus very hard indeed on what's going on in other production ways, particularly gesture, movement, costume, masking or non-masking, and so on. And one of the revelatory things to me about watching the Ninagawa production was the way that the actor playing Medea used his voice going up and down the hill, especially in the big soliloquies. There's a sort of operatic, oratorical use of the entire voice over a couple of octaves, which really made you hear the speech as an emotional sound statement rather than the actual content of the words. Other thing was I found his use of his back and his arms and the hunching and the way that misery and anger were brought out was really quite devastating, and I think it's suggestive of what a great actor in ancient Athens might have done. I think we may be getting closer to the ancient acting stars by watching the Ninagawa production.
We think of theatre as something you go to in the evening to relax between work and going home. It's something that runs in repertory the whole time. You can go to the theatre any day you want. It's rather different in ancient Athens.
All the surviving Greek tragedies we've got are actually Athenian tragedies, and they, all except one of them, come from the 5th century. They were performed in Athens at festivals in honour of the god Dionysus, and they're simultaneously civic events and profoundly religious events.
It looks as if perhaps as many as half of all the citizens in the whole of Athens and Attica, which of course is a big area of countryside all around Athens, as many as half might have gone to the theatre, which is extraordinary. If you think of even a middle-sized British town, getting half the people in all that town out to a single occasion. Maybe half the people in that town might watch some royal wedding or some football match on the television, but to get half of them out into the same civic space, into the same area to participate in a communal occasion, is something that's actually quite remote from our experience. Now, when I say the community, though, one's got to remember, of course, that ancient Athens had slaves, they wouldn't come to the theatre, and that women were not citizens in the full sense of the word. And at the very least, this audience is predominantly a male audience. Personally, I believe it was an exclusively male audience. And that lines it, if you like, with the meetings of the Democratic Assembly, with the meetings of the law courts. These are huge gatherings of the male citizens of Athens. And I think the theatre, too, is a gathering of the male citizens of Athens, where they put themselves through an experience which no one would want to undergo in everyday life. Instead, they lay aside a special festival time to explore both the most terrible aspects of human existence in their tragedies and the most ridiculous aspects of human existence in their comedies.
The Medea was played in front of the massed Athenian citizenry, and it's important to try and consider what its major preoccupations were in order to understand and illuminate some of the aspects of the play which perhaps don't engage our emotional sympathies quite as much as they should. The first is that the Athenian citizens gave themselves a lot of privileges, and these privileges were guarded with an almost paranoid anxiety. They could only be passed on to legitimate sons of citizens, which meant that legitimacy of birth was of extraordinary importance in Athens. After 451 BC, which is 20 years before the Medea, Pericles had passed a law that meant you had to prove that not only your father but also your mother were of authentic Athenian citizen families. Now, I think this fundamentally helps to illuminate Jason's situation in the Medea. It's very easy to sympathise with Medea's plight. It's less easy to sympathise with Jason. But if you're an Athenian man going to watch this play, you're watching a man who's in a city where he's got a wife who's not from that city, she's not even Greek, and he desperately wants to make his way in that city. So his foreign wife, by whom his sons were actually not going to get any kind of citizenship in Corinth, has become a huge embarrassment. The second feature which it helps to illuminate is why she does kill the children. Is it just to spite him? No, it isn't. It's far more than that. In killing the children, she wipes out his whole citizen household. She completely abolishes his ability to perpetuate his own kinship line. It's a far more profound offence against him than it is actually possible for us to imagine. It's not just personal hurt, it's about his whole kinship line through time, and that's partly why she kills off his new wife, so that he can't get new heirs by her either.
If there are women there in the audience, it seems to me this is a different experience, if you like, a more closer to reality experience for the men of the audience than if the women are not there. If the women are not there, they can explore the nightmare, they can experience it fully, and then it hasn't happened. The women aren't there, the women haven't seen it, the women have not perhaps gained ideas from it, because it's quite dangerous, isn't it? It's saying women can get at their husbands in this absolutely fundamental way by destroying the very thing that they've produced between them. And I'm inclined to think that it ties in with the notion that women were not present in the audience, that a tragedy like Medea can so fully explore the very worst possibility of family life, that the woman destroys the children.
Medea is remarkable in that she blurs or confuses a lot of the boundaries that Athenians needed in order to organise their perception of the world, categories that they needed. She is a woman, but she actually uses the language very often that would be expected in the mouth of a man. From the first moment when she emerges from the house, she starts saying things which you'd expect in the mouth of a man rather than a woman. Most women in Athenian tragedy apologise when they come out. They're expected to stay indoors. Most women say, "I'm very sorry to have come out, please don't censure me." What Medea says is, "I have come out lest you censor me for being an introverted private person," which is quite extraordinary. It immediately signals that this is no ordinary woman.
この土地のご婦人の皆様方
And at one very important point in the play, she actually uses the male form of the verb to marry. She actually says to Jason, "Did I take you to wife and abandon you then?" sarcastically. But the form of the verb for taking to wife that she uses is actually male, and this really must have been quite scintillating theatre.
幸せを不幸せと勘違いせぬことだ。なんとでも言葉をお並べなさいな。安楽な逃げ場をお持ちのあなたですもの。私は一人で頼る人もなく所払いに追っ払われる身。それもこれも我からと招いたこと。誰を恨むわけにもいくまい。私が何をいたしまして、掟にかなわぬ釣り合いたそうであなたを捨てでもいたしまして。もったいなくもご漁師方に身の程知らずな呪いの言葉を吐きかけたではないか。私自らが呪いなのだわ。あなたのお大切なお家柄への激しい呪い。もうこれ以上問答無用。
The play is really quite odd. In formal terms, Euripides did things which he didn't do in most of his other plays. For example, he only uses 2 actors. People had been able to use 3 in tragedy for a long time before, and Euripides almost always did. I think Euripides chose to use only 2 actors for a very specific reason. That is that he wanted Medea to dominate the stage from the moment that she first comes out of the house and to take on, as it were, all her enemies, all her male enemies. If Euripides had complicated the scene with a third important speaking part on stage, he'd have erected a triangular situation which would have made that primal duality, that sort of binary articulation of sex war, it would have rendered that thoroughly diluted. The second feature that makes it really quite anomalous is that Medea doesn't sing full-blown lyric arias, and heroines in tragedy would very normally be expected to use the lyric sung medium, and she doesn't do it at all. The third way in which I think it was really most unusual, perhaps most important of all, is that Medea is a tragic criminal who escapes scot-free. She's the only big league criminal in tragedy, murderess, who gets off unpunished at the end of the play.
All this gives us an insight into how Euripides' audience might have experienced the play. But what is it that makes the play so compelling for a modern audience?
The thing about Medea that most obviously transports itself immediately into our society, where, after all, divorce and horrible breakups of marriages are all too everyday, is the conflict within the family, the man who's gone off with what seems to be like a better prospect, a richer, younger woman. And the way the woman who has been loyal to him, who has brought up his children, how does she respond? That seems to speak immediately to us. If I were putting on Medea now, this I would regard as the great challenge. How do I relate the later scenes of the play to the earlier scenes of the play? In the earlier scenes of the play, we seem to be dealing with something we can understand, something we can relate to, something that is to a study in how a woman responds to infidelity, to disloyalty. And then in the later part of the play, we seem to have moved into something else. The woman kills her children. Now that's something we read in the papers every day, all too frequently. Parents kill their children. But when parents kill their children, we would think of them in terms of being mentally unbalanced. And it's usually part of a pattern of disturbed behaviour, and it culminates in a suicide. And then at the end of the play, far from being suicidal, far from saying, this world is unfit for my kids and unfit for me and I'm out of it, far from that, she's triumphant. She's totally triumphant up there in her chariot. She revels in her vengeance on Jason. And far from killing herself, she's going to go off to Athens. Athens, the most wonderful city in Greece, praised by the chorus earlier in the play, where everything is so civilized and so cultivated. She's going to enjoy the hospitality of Aegeus. As far as this play is concerned, it looks as if she's going to go to Athens and live happily ever after. The paradox is happily ever after doing the things that she's done.
The aspect of the story which is the most compelling one and makes it the most trans-historically exciting and appalling of all the Greek tragedies, I believe, except for the Oedipus, the infanticide, is precisely the feature of the Medea that has usually been either played down or written out. People want to put on Medeas, but historically they have found it extremely difficult to cope with that particular crime. It's actually been felt often to be too shocking for public enactment. Several versions of the Medea have actually substituted suicide for infanticide. Others give her a fit of exculpating madness. It's all right to kill the children provided that she had been sent mad and didn't know what she was doing. But it really wasn't until the early days of the 20th century that people could take the Medea straight.
Don't be in the dark about programmes from the Open University. The Ozone magazine gives you a complete guide with full listing information and much more. For your free copy, call us or log on to our website.
Music breathes new life into old folk tales on BBC Learning Zone now, as Judith Weir reflects on a source of inspiration.
The little people were small. That we know to be a fact. The fairies lived in the fairy knoll on the raised beach, which we call the Machar, beside the shore. It was round, very eye-catching, and you knew that things were happening there.
There are many stories about fairies from the Western Isles. These have been a constant source of inspiration for the composer Judith Weir.
A large majority of the folklore that I've read has been Scottish, and one theme comes out to me from it time and time again, and that is the number of stories of people who leave home and never come back again. It's remarkable, just the number that there are, and that has figured hugely in my work. If I were to work with more, as it seems, complicated literature, I think there would soon be a confusion and a clash between what I'm doing and what the writer does. But with folk tales, all you get is the story, and that leaves me a lot of space to work.
At harvest time, the whole family would make their way to the Machar early in the morning, and the father would scythe the corn. The mother would make the sheaves of corn and bind them, and the children would gather all the sheaves together in fours and make them into stooks. Now the mother would lay the baby underneath the stook of corn, and now and again she'd come back to make sure the baby was comfortable. And on this particular day she came back. There was no baby. Instead of the baby, there was an old man. The little people had come, and they dragged the old man, put the old man under the stook, took away this beautiful bonny baby, and took him away into the fairy knoll on the Machar nearby. But one thing is certain, they would have kept that baby for a year and a day.
I set a group of Scottish ballads under the title Scotch Minstrelsy, and I think this is the earliest instance of my setting a text about the subject of disappearance. One of the songs in that cycle is called Bonnie James Campbell. It has, like a lot of these Scottish texts, an incredibly simple story. Really, it just says, one day Bonnie James Campbell rode away on his horse, and later on the horse came back, but he didn't. And that's really all it tells us. There was something in the very brutality of that story that attracted me to set the poem.
Bonnie James Campbell is a song for voice and piano, written for the tenor Neil Mackey. The vocal line is very simple and lyrical, like a Scottish folk song. In contrast, the piano part gradually unfolds the drama of the story. It begins with Bonnie James Campbell riding away. The piano sets the scene with very clear, simple chords. The second part of the poem starts to tell the story. The piano part becomes more aggressive.
His old mother, crying full sad. Out came his bonny bride dead in her head. My meadow lies green and my corn is unshorn, but Bonnie James Campbell will never return.
The drama increases, and in verse 3 the pianist is asked to go slightly mad, hammering the piano to portray the turmoil of the song.
His hand
story ends with a fading ringing figure, described by Judith as a cross between the sound of horses' hoofs and church bells.
Oh, hame came his guitars, but never came he.
Many of our songs are about strange things that happened, people disappearing. And there are many of our songs, especially in Barra here, where the pretty young girl would go out, perhaps early in the morning or late in the afternoon, to milk the cow, up to the moor, up to the hillside, and would never be seen again.
After writing Scotch Minstrelsy, I wrote another collection of songs called Songs from the Exotic, and this collection also has one song which tells the story of someone who disappears in Scotland. It's very much influenced by an actual folk song from South Uist in the Outer Hebrides in the west of Scotland, and I've called it simply The Song of a Girl Ravished Away by the Fairies in South Uist, because that's the story, basically. The girl goes out one night to fetch the cattle in, and the fairies steal her away, and she sings a plaintive song to her mother. The actual song that influenced this piece is in a wonderful collection of Margaret Fay Shaw, Folk Songs and Folklore of South Uist, and the song in question, a Gaelic song, tells that story. It's very simple, in a way, a typical folk song, very repetitive, and yet very plaintive and touching.
Get veret o krages kyrkja, get veret o jachuver hyttevja, get veret o skinages dynjega,
Judith made a few changes to the folk song. She slowed the speed of the tune and altered a few of the notes. Here's the original folk song. And here's Judith's version. The piano part opens simply, like Bonnie James Campbell. And the central part of the song is more intense.
Some years after I'd written Songs from the Exotic, I was approached by a very interesting new music group called Tapestry, who play a repertoire of music for soprano, clarinet and piano, and they asked me if I would write a piece, but unfortunately I was a bit busy at the time. But one of my closest colleagues as a composer, Michael Finnessy, a composer who himself has made a great deal of use of folklore in his work, suggested that he could add a clarinet part to my Songs of the Exotic. And indeed he did this, and it makes the most wonderful addition because in a way his style is very different from mine. And I think this is very much in the tradition of folklore, that a piece of folklore doesn't just belong to one person. Many people get together to write it over the years, and so we almost have a folklore edition of Songs from the Exotic, and this is the piece that Tapestry play.
My love, let me home to my mother. My love, let me home, let me home. My love,
became so interested in the phenomenon of disappearing folk stories that I made a little collection for myself of folk songs which tell the story of disappearances. And when I was asked to write a piano quartet by the group Domus, I, for some reason, couldn't get out of my head a couple of tunes which I'd made in my collection. One was an Irish song about a lady who one day just leaves with the gypsies and never comes back. But the other song was the same song from Songs from the Exotic, the song about the girl ravished away by the fairies. And it seemed to me that I would love to make a more complicated instrumental version of this song. And this forms the second half of my piano quartet, Distance and Enchantment.
In this piece, the violin plays just the first two notes of the original song. And the viola plays an embroidered version of the whole song. With cello and piano weaving around it.
Folklore seems to me an important subject for everyone to read because it covers just a huge part of the world's mental history, and for that reason I make no apology about returning to it time and time again. Another very specific reason that I personally like to use it in my work is that it has a terrific bareness and simplicity, and this allows me as a composer to, as it were, weave something around these very bare bones.
They reckon that one man was 7 years in a fairy novel. They kind of converted him so that he was their own size, they could get in. But when he got inside, the place was a really beautiful home altogether. It was all beautiful girls and beautiful boys, music and food and everything you'd need. And he enjoyed his visit to the fairy knoll, but when he came out, there was no signs of the cattle or even some other people he left behind were dead. And later on he discovered that he was put under a spell inside this fairy knoll.
The next time I wrote a disappearing person story in music was in an opera called The Vanishing Bridegroom, which I wrote for Scottish Opera. This opera is based on a collection of Gaelic folk tales, popular tales of the West Highlands by J.F. Campbell, and these stories were noted down by him in the 19th century. The Vanishing Bridegroom consists of 3 acts, but I also attempted to tell a story that goes through the whole opera, so you could see this opera as 3 episodes in the life of a particular family who live on a remote Scottish island. The music of The Inheritance is very much influenced in places by existing Scottish folk music. The opening of the whole opera is a very good example. It takes place at a funeral, and the music has been influenced by the tradition of Gaelic psalm singing, which still takes place today in some Presbyterian churches in the Western Isles. This is a form of hymn singing which uses no instrument accompaniment. Organs and things like that are seen as idolatrous in these churches, so all the singing is simply led by someone called the precentor, and everyone who sings the hymn comes in a different place, and it has a kind of rather raw, ragged sound to it, which is very entrancing once you hear it for a few minutes. In The Vanishing Bridegroom, I try to copy this technique using an opera chorus. My method of doing it is to bring different members of the opera chorus in at different times, singing the same kind of music. The basses come in, they sing along for a little bit. In come higher voices, they're very long lines. Then in come some more voices. They're singing the same kind of music, but they're not singing it together. Later on in The Inheritance, there's another very obvious borrowing from a form of Scottish folk music. We finally get to the wedding scene. This poor woman who doesn't want to get married is getting married, and a bunch of fiddlers turn up to play at her wedding. It seems to me it has the character of something that's been smudged by tears. I think there's something rather sad about the overall sound of this fiddling, which in normal occasions is meant to be a very happy sound. The story of the disappearance is a classic disappearing person story. A child is born to a young couple, and the husband goes away to register the birth. It's in a way quite full of everyday details of that kind. But while he's away, he foolishly goes by a fairy hillside. He sees a light and disappears into this hill. For 20 years, as it turns out.
I see people I knew. I knew them well. There's no one about for miles. Go on, I'll catch you up. Where are you? Come back.
The Gaelic text comes from a collection of stories called Camina Gadelica, and this is a collection mostly of Gaelic verse. And I think it's very much the language of Gaelic which gives this act its particular atmosphere. One of the Scottish musical traditions which influenced me in the second act of writing my own opera was the tradition of walking songs, the songs which are sung by women who are beating cloth in the Western Isles. I particularly copied the sound of this kind of music in The Disappearance, where there's a group of 3 women who sit on the stage throughout the act and are constantly commenting on the action. And I think their situation, they're sitting down, they're actually knitting rather than beating cloth. But that tradition of music certainly influenced this act.
He'll never more come back, come back.
We have one loch in Barra in which lived a water horse or a kilpie. There certainly was one in Ewelst, and it was pointed out to us as children, and we certainly avoided it, especially as a road went through the very centre of it. And we would look left and right as we passed by in the moonlight. The water horse would come, and it would do several things. The main thing it would do would be to flash its silver mane and invite the young girl to leap on his back and then plunge into the deep black moor water. And she would never be seen again.
The water horse was known to be all over the islands and the Highlands of Scotland. He used to come in the form of a young, handsome man. He would ask the girls to run their fingers through his hair. And once they started running their fingers through his head, they could always notice the reeds, and that would be enough to prove to them that he was the water horse.
The third act is called The Stranger. It's the story of the young girl who we saw being born previously. She's now grown up into a handsome young woman, and one day a strange but handsome and well-dressed man comes to visit her and asks her to marry him.
The stranger woos the daughter to the sound of flutes, brass and lower strings. In contrast, she is accompanied by oboes, clarinets and violins, as she asks him about his strange appearance.
When I think of this group of pieces, which starts off with ballads, in which I was interested at the age of 11 and started to set soon afterwards, I then reworked some of these ballad settings into an instrumental chamber piece for a few instruments, and finally I changed the material again so that it could become an opera. I find this a very satisfying process, that one particular set of ideas has taken me really throughout my composing life of quite a few years now, and I feel that it will take me into the future as well. I think also that this is rather the way that folklore itself gets made. Someone makes a version of a story, then someone else comes along and makes a new version, and it's a continuous process which takes place really right throughout the ages. And I see my work on these legends as simply another person's version of something which has been lying around for hundreds of years in this part of the world.
Learn another language, find a new career, improve your computing skills. Do it all with BBC Learning Zone. Find out more at bbc.co.uk/Learning Zone.
How long do you intend to stay in the UK?
I don't know yet. Hello, your cell phone card.
Pick a card.
Hello, my love. It's Tanya. We're in England. What's wrong with you? Where are you?
Are you a refugee?
A refugee by accident.
Anyone caught trying to escape will be returned. Aloha. Have you ever had a curry?
For a copy of the current BBC Learning Zone programme guide, send an A4 stamped addressed envelope with stamps to the value of 33p to BBC Learning Zone, room 2560, White City, London, W12 7TS. Men paint whilst women pose. At least that's how tradition paints the gender roles. BBC Learning Zone reveals the true picture at 6:30. First, a journey to the real and imaginary islands that influenced writer Jean Rhys.
The Caribbean island of Dominica was the birthplace of the writer Jean Rhys. It's the setting for her most famous novel, Wide Sargasso Sea. The relationship between the country, its landscape, its history and its culture, and the novel is profound and complex. A novel is fiction, whereas history pursues the facts. So what kind of hybrid is a historical novel like White Sargasso Sea? Published in 1966, it's set on plantation estates during the troubled years which followed the emancipation of the slaves in 1834. Jean Rhys spent her first 16 years, her impressionable years, in Dominica. The novel is full of her childhood memories, but it's no more autobiography than its history. Like so many colonial children, Jean Rhys read the classic literature of an England she mostly knew from books. Wide Sargasso Sea is best known as the prequel to Charlotte Bronte's novel, Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is a plain but spirited governess who falls in love with her romantic employer, Mr. Rochester. But he has a dark secret, a mad wife whom he keeps locked in the attic at his home, Thornfield Hall. Her presence haunts the novel, but she's never allowed to speak. In Wide Sargasso Sea, Jean Rhys invents her side of the story and sympathetically accounts for her madness. Like Jean Rhys, she was meant to be a white West Indian.
Imagine Jean Rhys reading Jane Eyre here, with its descriptions of leafless trees, frost, snow, children huddling to keep warm round a meagre fire, chilblains even. It's unimaginable. And no wonder that, like so many colonially educated children, she had a confused and romantic view of England. But this was innocent. Much more pernicious was the crude and demeaning view of the West Indies from the other side of the wide Sargasso Sea.
Bronte perceived that landowners like Rochester owed much of their wealth to the colonies, but she obscured the guilt of slavery by suggesting that such wealth was tainted by insanity. Jean Rhys wanted to say that instead of madness, the first Mrs. Rochester was a victim of historical circumstances. Jane Eyre may be her starting point, but she quickly drops any connection with the Victorian novel. Jane Eyre herself is ignored just as Mrs. Rochester was silenced by Charlotte Bronte. Jean Rhys has a completely different agenda.
Rhys's historical novel, Wide Sargasso Sea, I think, is an attempt to explain her personal history as a white West Indian and also the society from which she emerges, the Caribbean, and the relationship between the Caribbean and the culture of England to which she migrated. And in a sense, she's looking at the colonial experience, the tragedy of slavery and its aftermath.
In Wide Sargasso Sea, Jean Rhys is essentially bringing together her whole life at the end of her life. And it is all a book of her experiences. I mean, I can go through the Wide Sargasso Sea and take you physically to those places in Dominica that she is describing. And just as she does it with the landscape and the buildings, she does it too with those periods of her experience and what she has absorbed from the history of the island.
The history of slavery and its legacy haunt the novel. The slave market still stands in Dominica's capital, Roseau. Those slaves who survived the terrible journey from Africa, or their descendants, were auctioned off from this platform to the plantation owners or managers. Their forced labour was the basis of colonial wealth. In the novel, slavery was a bitter and recent reality.
So I asked about Christophine. Was she very old? Had she always been with us? She was your father's wedding present to me. One of his presents. He thought I would be pleased with the Martinique girl. I don't know how old she was when they brought her, quite young. I don't know how old she is now. Does it matter? Why do you pester and bother me about all these things that happened long ago?
Of course, the novel doesn't regret the end of slavery, but it's pervaded by a sense of foreboding.
The sugar plantations, which provided so much of the wealth that built so many great English country houses, fell into ruin with emancipation, which freed the slaves and left so many of the settlers in comparative poverty.
Jean Rhys herself was descended from this same planter class. The family estate at Geneva had been a sugar mill worked by slaves until emancipation. Geneva is the setting for Coulibaly, the home of the main character Antoinette, or Mrs. Rochester. Coulibaly is burnt down in a revolt by the former slaves. Geneva itself was abandoned in the early 20th century. Jean Rhys also drew on family myths, particularly one about her great-grandmother and her husband, James Lockhart.
He died quite early, and she was left alone in charge of the children. And this, we're talking about the mid-19th century, about 10 years after the end of slavery in the West Indies. So that was in 1834. About 10 years later, in 1844, Jean Maxwell Lockhart was with her children in the state house when there were a series of uprisings or unrests on the island, when there was a census that was being taken, and a rumor spread very rapidly that this was in preparation to restore slavery and so on. And there was a riot outside the house, and in family myth or story, the house was burned down, and this scene, which I'm sure fascinated and frightened Jean as a young girl, she used and drew on for the central scene of the mob and the attack and the burning down of Antoinette's home.
The house was burning. The yellow-red sky was like sunset, and I knew I would never see Colibri again. Nothing would be left. The golden ferns and the silver ferns, the orchids, the jasmine and the honeysuckle, and the picture of the miller's daughter. When they had finished, there would be nothing left but the blackened walls and the mounting stone. That was always left. That could not be stolen or burnt.
The conflict between emancipation and the decline of the plantocracy is one of a series of reflections and opposites in the novel. Even freedom casts a shadow. The novel does not tell the history of emancipation so much as its effect on the planters.
Reese is not a spokesperson for the plantocracy in the sense that she's not an apologist for the plantocracy. She's a product of the plantocracy. And I think even her father, as a Welsh doctor, may not really have been part of the original plantocracy. If you think of the plantocracy as a landed class, if you think of her autobiography, the unfinished autobiography, you realize that they were in relatively diminished circumstances. But in so much as she was a white West Indian, she represented a class that had power. But she, as a woman, I think, felt in particular the vulnerability of the powerless. And I think this womanness mediated, compensated for whatever power she might have felt as a white person.
Landscape is a recurring feature in the novel. Like their houses and mills, the settlers themselves are overpowered by the landscape, where menace shadows beauty.
I went very early to the bathing pool. It was a beautiful place. Wild, untouched, above all untouched, with an alien, disturbing, secret loveliness. And it kept its secret. I'd find myself thinking, what I see is nothing. I want what it hides. That is not nothing.
The menace felt in the landscape reflects the threat whites felt from the freedom given to the former slaves. A new beginning for the slaves is an ending for them.
I don't think Reese is aiming at any simple resolution. If you look at the opening of White Sargasso, there's that strong sense of ambiguity that the character feels, when trouble comes, close ranks. The trouble is the emancipation of slaves, and that can't be for the slaves, the enslaved, trouble. It has to be something positive. So Antoinette is in an ambiguous position. She's white, but she doesn't identify with the whites in Jamaica. And so you're looking at complex interconnecting forces that can't be simply resolved as a melting pot of cultures. There's a struggle, and that's a legacy that we inherit now.
The mountainous and forested terrain of Dominica made a natural refuge for escaped slaves from all over the Caribbean. So while the planters lived in perpetual fear of insurrection, The islands were pawns in the protracted wars between the international superpowers, France and Britain.
The history of Dominica, of course, is one bloody succession of battles and massacres and repossessions and stealings, perhaps. But, of course, most recently, there had been the battle between the French and the English. And in essence, of course, the English finally won and grabbed the island. And by the time Jean was growing up there, it was a very British place. However, the French had owned it for a long time and had terrific effect on it. And the French patois was, of course, the language of the native people of the island. And, of course, the Catholic Church had become their religion.
The wars left a legacy of cultural contrasts, which the novel reflects. The Catholic Church played an important part in Jean Rhys's life. Although she was a Protestant, she attended a Catholic school, part of the rich cultural mix in which she grew up. The settler class were happy to leave education to the Catholics.
I think probably it was the only school at the time. It was probably not only the best, but the only school of repute, so that anyone would want their child to go to the convent school, regardless of their religion. Education in those days was mainly for those who could afford it. And that meant whites and the upper middle class, so to speak. The nouveau riche, those who had property, those who had land and so forth, could afford to send their children to the convent school. The majority of the others never got to high school, never got to the convent school, never got to any school at all. That was that time. So one could understand that the girls who were there would have come because the school had a good reputation, not only from this island, but from several other islands, and they would be of the upper class.
In the novel, the Anglican Church represents something forbidding, masculine and empty. But Catholicism represents something warm, exotic, welcoming and predominantly feminine.
This convent was my refuge, a place of sunshine and of death, where very early in the morning the clap of a wooden signal woke the 9 of us who slept in the long dormitory. The long brown room was full of gold sunlight and shadows of trees moving quietly. Great splashes of sunlight as we ran up the wooden steps of the refectory. Hot coffee and rolls and melting butter. But after the meal, now and at the hour of our death, and at midday and at 6 in the evening, now and at the hour of our death.
Thoughts of death may ripple through the warm life at the convent, but Antoinette's school days there are untroubled by Protestant obsessions with guilt and judgment. The reflections and opposites in the novel aren't simple, but they themselves reflect the different attitudes of different cultures to the country.
In Wild Sargasso we see that reflection of the British formality and the more fluid, more open, more adaptable French Creole tradition. Yes, I mean, Rochester himself represents that difference. Which also came through with the British and the land. The fact that here was this mountainous, untamed, almost untamable landscape, which in the literature one sees the British constantly fighting against, that out of this landscape they must make order. And out of this confused society of people that do not speak English, that are totally dependent on French Creole, order must be created. Now, the French vision is far more fluid, mixed in with an exploration, a joy, a celebration of new food, new crops, new people, music, song that is tied in with that Afro-Creole connection there with the French. So yes, it is reflected in the White Sargasso Sea between the characters. And of course, I feel that caught in the middle of them, halfway, is Antoinette, because she is a bit of both. And she is caught between these two societies in this particular landscape.
The culture of Dominica had, of course, another element, and that was the African traditions brought by the slaves. The resonances of African culture are still important in traditions of music and dance, particularly the traditional form of band mauvais.
Well, band movie, as they translated to English, would be a bad band, okay? And that really characterizes the movements that they use, the speed of the music. It's quite fast, it's very energetic. They're very scary. I mean, I think the idea behind all of this is to generate some fear in the audiences. I remember when I was a child and I saw these bands, I mean, I would be so terrified because it's not just the way they move, it's also the way they're dressed. They wear masks, they're totally covered. I mean, if you notice, they have gloves sometimes. They're wrapped up in sheets and towels, and they have this tall conical hats, a lot of them. And it really generated a lot of fear in people, and I think the idea really is to scare, and that was part of the enjoyment.
This is dance on the edge of menace, one of the more disturbing elements in the carnival spirit of license, subversion, disorder and misrule. In the novel, African culture is obscured and criminalised. Even drumming was declared illegal before emancipation. No wonder, then, that its hidden presence so terrified the ruling class. More than half a century after emancipation, Jean Rhys's childhood was still marked by fears of black insurrection. Yet her attitude towards the black population of Dominica was always ambivalent. Both love and hate, fear and attraction are reflected in the novel.
I believe that she felt it herself, that she always longed to be black. Being black is warm and gay, and being white is sad and cold. And this contrast, this difference runs through her writings all the time. At the same time, one mustn't simplify it too much, because at the same time, the heroine, and Jean herself, senses very much that black people don't like her. She is not part of them. She's part of the enemy or the oppressor, and she is hated by them at the same time. And therefore, there's nothing welcoming there for her. It therefore contains fear for her as well, and threat and menace. So, yes, she longs to be black, but on the other hand, she's afraid as well.
I'm not sure how far we can take it as a kind of literal desire to be black. It is more a sense of rejection of what whiteness had come to mean. By the time she was leaving Dominica, you see her talking about carnival, for example, as an exciting moment where people put on masks and assume other identities, and she identifies with that whole process.
The memories of childhood grow stronger as we grow older, and the memories of exiles are always specially poignant. So it's no wonder that a place as vibrant as this should imprint such powerful memories on the mind of a writer.
Jean Rhys's memories of Dominica are nearly all from her childhood. She left Dominica at 16 and only returned once. She went to England, but the country of her childhood fantasies turned out to be so disappointing in reality. There's a sense in her writing that what is absent or remembered, imagined or lost, is more vivid than present reality.
Jean Rhys's notions of what England was like, I think, is reflected in many Caribbean people who came to Britain prior to the 1970s. I grew up in the 1950s and 60s as a school child in Dominica with a vision, certainly, that this was a country, a wonderful, amazing country. We sang the national anthem every morning at school. We sat in classrooms looked down upon by a young Queen Elizabeth II and Duke of Edinburgh. We lived with it. People arrived on the shore, Princess Margaret, Princess Alice, Princess Royal, and we stood on the waterfront and were bid to wave. These were amazing beings that alighted into this world. And that is the problem that existed with many of the immigrants that went to England. They had been led to believe the propaganda that we were getting was here is this mighty, wonderful, hospitable country that is caring for all her little colonies, all her little children. It was the mother country.
She always hated England and those things that it stood for in her mind of coldness and meanness. But she also had a great desire for it, need for it, an image of it as something secure, solid, protecting. And I think this is at the heart of the relationship between the Jean Rhys heroine, Antoinette being a perfect example, and the Englishman, hero stroke villain, of whom Rochester is a perfect example as well. And that's to say that although he represents to her so many oppressive and frightening things, at the same time he represents some longed for security and comfort and protection from fear and the outside world.
The honeymoon house in the hills is the main setting for the second part of the novel, which relates the story of Antoinette's relationship with Rochester. His sense of alienation reflects Jean Rhys's sense of the unreality and menace of an unknown land.
The road climbed upward. On one side, the wall of green, on the other, a steep drop to the ravine below. There was a soft, warm wind blowing, but I understood why the porter had called it a wild place. Not only wild, but menacing. Those hills would close in on you.
Both characters are caught between alien cultures, but Antoinette is also made more vulnerable by her sex.
The alienation of the woman in a patriarchal culture is very strong. And interestingly enough, I think as a Black West Indian reading White Sargasso Sea, I can identify with Antoinette because as woman, she's victimized by a patriarchal order. And in some ways, the patriarchal order becomes identical with the system of slavery in a very odd way. So as a white woman, she's vulnerable because she's woman, and I can identify with her much more easily because of her being female and victimized than I could with her as a white person who represents the sort of dominant, controlling, enslaving order.
The transaction which puts Antoinette and her wealth in the power of a husband is another of the novel's reflections. It mirrors slavery. But mirrors go on reflecting, and so although we started from Antoinette's point of view, the second part of the novel is narrated by Rochester. It's his version of the story.
She is trying to see the man's point of view. The great part 2 of White Sargasso Sea is the first time, really, it's a great achievement in Jean Rhys's work and in Jean Rhys's life to try and inhabit the man's point of view. And when she inhabits his point of view, I think what she sees is that he is a victim too, that you can't just divide the world up between the powerful and the powerless, the exploiters and the exploited, but that even the exploiters, why are the exploiters exploiters? That is because they themselves have suffered and been exploited, and they have therefore decided to turn around and defend themselves. And that is, of course, in a way, what Antoinette herself tries but fails to do. Rochester succeeds more than Antoinette does.
The novel is an enigma. It seems to constantly change perspective. Nothing is sure and solid. Everything is fluid, like its mysterious title.
The name of the novel, Wild Sargasso Sea, I see reflects that in-betweenness of a character like Antoinette and of the people, the white West Indians of which she is part. It is extremely difficult if you have descended from a family that has lived in the Caribbean for over 200 years to place yourself as a British person or as a French person. For the whites in Martinique or even those in the scattered islands, British islands, it is and has been, and for Jean Rhys was, a major problem. And the reflection of the title is that area within the middle of the Atlantic, halfway between Europe and the Caribbean, where the currents circulate and leave in their center this placid, wide Sargasso Sea that is a gulf, a sea within a sea within an ocean, and it is neither Europe nor the Caribbean. It's in between. And I think that Jean Rhys was attempting on behalf of people like Antoinette to place that person, to say, look, I'm a Caribbean person, although very much the circumstances of the societies around me make me someone in the middle, in the wide Sargasso Sea.
Who paints whom and why? Now on BBC Learning Zone, it seems the art world's been framed.
This picture was painted in Italy in the mid-16th century. What does it represent? The answer seems straightforward enough. It shows a man painting a picture of a woman. This is the natural order of things so far as the history of art is concerned. The man makes a painting. The woman is both his subject and his creation. The power to represent is normally vested in the male. Whatever roles women have been given in art, they tend to appear within a frame of reference that the male has defined. This work was painted by Le Valentin in the early 1600s. If you happened on it here in the National Gallery in London, you might pause for a moment and ask yourself what it represents. The clue lies in the different ages of the four male figures. The little boy is close to nature and plays with animals. The young man falls in love and sings romantic songs. The mature man has the cares of the world on his shoulder. He must be a philosopher in face of life's problems, or a soldier when called to action. As for the old man, what's left for him but to count his money, to lose himself in memory, and to console himself with drink? The subject of this painting is the four ages of man, a form of meditation on human life. This picture was painted in the 1760s by the English artist Joseph Wright of Derby. In a highly dramatised manner, it shows a scientist conducting an experiment to demonstrate the creation of a vacuum. Air is pumped out of the glass container into which a cockatoo has been put. Deprived of oxygen, the bird collapses. The children react with an innocent spontaneity. The young boy at the left presses forward in fascination, while the young girls are upset by what looks like cruelty. In fact, the picture contains several signs that all will be well. A man who may be the girl's father is reassuring them and pointing to the bird. The scientist's hand is poised to uncap the glass and let air back in. And at the far right, a servant boy looks up towards the cockatoo as he opens the door of its cage, ready for its return. The scientist communicates with the viewer, his outward look and gesture drawing our attention to the demonstration. What Right of Derby has done, I think, is to combine two separate themes. The traditional subject of the ages of man with a more modern and topical concern for the relationship of science and nature. The varied reactions can be read in the light of this concern. Each age has its proper form of response. Like the children, these two are behaving in a manner typical of their stage of life. But in their case, this means that they're more preoccupied with each other than with the scientific demonstration. It's for the mature men to comprehend the advances of science and to protect and instruct the young. And finally, the man of advanced years is the one who ponders the meaning of it all. In our first picture, the ages of man are represented as just that, stages of life defined in terms of the activities of four isolated male figures. In Right of Derby's painting, on the other hand, three of the figures are female. So what does this add to the account of human life that we're offered?
Well, not much. The female figures are all young, which suggests that their primary function is decorative. Their ages are significant, I think.
Like the young boy at the left, the youngest girl is looking directly at the experiment, though she's frowning where he's fascinated. It's the pubescent girl next to her who shows real distress, and so she demonstrates the expected sensibility of budding femininity. The fact that she is looking away also reinforces the conventional belief of the time that women aren't suited to scientific inquiry. The young woman to the left of the painting develops this idea by not appearing to notice the experiment at all, because she's too engrossed in the young man next to her.
So we don't exactly have three ages of woman here. We have three stages in the development of a marriageable girl. The theme of the ages of man has been popular because it tends to reinforce normal cultural notions of what it means to be a man. Expectations of femininity take a different form from that of masculinity. They largely revolve around the male perception of a woman's erotic potential.
I suppose the obvious explanation for this is that the vast majority of pictures in here were painted by male artists.
Approximately 800 artists represented in the National Gallery's historical collection. At the present time, 8 of those are women. That's about 1%.
Yeah, and if we ask what those figures tell us, we immediately get into very muddy water.
50 years ago, it might have been considered normal to suggest that women just didn't make major artists. However good they might be at embroidery, at watercolours, at flower painting, you wouldn't expect to find them represented in a collection of high art like this. And if I take the part of the traditional male curator, I'm going to say that my responsibility is to include the best. Generally speaking, women artists haven't been good enough to count. However much I might want to show more work by women, the quality is simply there.
Well, then I would want to respond by saying that in the history of Western art, quality is a term that's been defined by male art historians with reference to male artists for male readers, spectators and collectors. It's hardly surprising not very many women got into the club, but feminist ideas have had some effect. These days we're more likely to suspect that women artists have been ignored by the history of art and that the actual proportion of women to male artists was much higher than 1%. If generations of male curators have tended to favour male artists, we can see why women's ways of viewing and picturing the world haven't had much of a look in.
Okay, so still sticking with the part of the male curator, I'm never going to admit discrimination on my own part, so my best tactic is to go on insisting that there just haven't been many women artists, but to allow that discrimination in the past provides an explanation for that. And it is certainly true that women have not had the opportunities that men have had to practice and to develop as artists. But that was in the bad old days.
And of course, that's all behind us now. These days, there are plenty of successful women artists, and they'll get into the National Gallery one day, won't they?
Yes, of course, but as a curator, I'm still going to insist that the purpose of historical collections like this is truthfully to represent the legacy of the past and not to set matters right in retrospect.
Okay, so we have two ways to explain the very small number of women artists represented in the National Gallery. Either women in the past were, for one reason or another, deprived of the opportunity to become artists, and in that case the figures provide a fair reflection of the consequences. Or the artistic vision and legacy of women is still being discriminated against. And there were, in fact, a lot more successful women artists in the past than the figures would suggest.
The problem is that the legacy remains the same in either case. The National Gallery contains thousands of images of men and women, but the actual picturing of both genders is almost exclusively a male activity.
So how have women seen themselves when they weren't under the view of the male? Surely women artists must have made some contribution, at least to the picturing of femininity.
Well, here's one of our few women artists. This is Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, who was working in France just before the Revolution. It should be a really promising case. It's a self-portrait by a woman artist.
To me, the pose and expression suggest somebody presenting themselves for display to a man. Of course, when she painted this picture, the artist must have been looking at herself in a mirror. But she might still represent herself in a way that conformed to a male viewpoint. We've talked about who it is that most of the works in the National Gallery are painted by. But maybe what we should really be thinking about is who they're painted for.
What you're saying is that the artist appears self-conscious, as we might expect her to be, under the eye of a man. Is this always going to be the case with women's pictures of women? This painting was done in the mid-1880s by Berthe Morisot, who was a central member of the French Impressionist group. What we have here is not a self-portrait, but a woman pictured by another woman.
The pose and the style certainly seem more relaxed and informal. The distracted gaze suggests she's not concerned with who's looking at her. But the really significant difference lies in the style. In the Vigée Lebrun, the figure is clearly contrasted with the background. The blue sky serves as a foil which foregrounds the beauty and the expression of the woman. Because of the way it's painted, the Berthe Morisot portrait works differently. Here the whole surface is given equal weight, and the painting shows no evident interest in her erotic potential. This has the effect of making the viewer see the figure as a personality within an environment, rather than merely seeing her in terms of her femininity. And we are invited to speculate what she's thinking about, rather than being concerned exclusively with what she looks like. She is, in fact, given a definite psychological presence.
I think some male artists of the time also found themselves exploring the very issues we've been talking about. How women appear under the regard of men, and how they might look in moments of unself-consciousness, when they're apparently not being seen at all, let alone by men. Edgar Degas was an associate of Berthe Morisot's. In the 1880s and 90s, he made a whole series of pastel paintings like this, of women washing, drying themselves and doing their hair. They've often been seen as voyeuristic, but it seems to me we can also think of them as attempts to picture private moments, as though they really were private. Not so much to capture the look of an undressed woman, as to reach out in imagination for a sense of what it's like to be her. Of course, it's a pretty strange and paradoxical idea, a picture of someone who's not being looked at.
And it's not easy to get round the fact that the viewpoint is that of a voyeur, and that the subject reflects a typically male interest in the female body.
If we're really asking what a woman looks like when she's not being looked at by a man, then we do have to at least make the point that women don't spend all their time taking their clothes off. This isn't really a picture of what a woman looks like when she's on her own. It's a painting by a man of how he imagines she might look. It's still a part of a male construction of femininity.
Okay, well, that takes us back to the point you made earlier about the importance of working out who it is that's supposed to be seeing what the picture shows. Now, here in the National Gallery, there is another picture by a male artist that I think.
What it shows is a street in Paris at the hour of promenade. It has come on to rain when everyone's out for a stroll. Well, almost everyone, because the young woman at the left doesn't quite fit in with the rest. She has no hat or gloves or umbrella. She's carrying a basket, of the kind that might be used to deliver an item of upmarket millinery. And she's looking self-conscious, uncertain, slightly deferential. She's looking, in fact, just as an attractive young working girl of the time might have looked, under the appraising stare of an interested male of a superior class. The class to which the other figures in the painting belong. Notably the older woman with the two little girls at the right, and the man at the left with the ginger beard, who looks as though he might be considering offering the young woman the shelter of his umbrella.
And if we ask who it is that has prompted this response in her, the answer is reflected back from the picture itself. It is that person who stands in her path, where the viewer stands.
To put it another way, what the picture actually shows us is what an interested middle-class man is seeing, an attractive working girl who may be exploitable. It's as though Renoir directs us to look through that man's eyes and to experience both his class and his desire in imagination. And yet, the painter also shows us what he might not have seen. He shows us what it's like to be looked at like that, to be attractive, to be stared at, and to be unable fully to return the stare without being considered immodest.
The really interesting figure is the little girl at the lower right. I think her direct outward gaze helps us to define the imaginary male viewer. For while the imagined bourgeois spectator is looking at the young woman on the left, the little girl is staring directly out of the picture at us. The child's cool, appraising stare draws our attention to what the imaginary viewer may not be seeing, namely the young woman's self-consciousness. It seems to me that Renoir uses the child's expression to make us, the actual viewers, aware of the power and the effect of the male gaze. The painting as a whole seems to say, this is what women look like when they're being looked at by men. So what had previously been taken for granted in the picturing of women, the coy, self-conscious, pliant response, is now made the explicit subject matter of a painting by a man.
I'm not suggesting that Renoir was a premature feminist, but it does seem as if the whole question of what it was like for women to be constantly on view is one that came to engage some advanced artists of both sexes in the later 19th century.
The implication then is that women's psychological presence gets into painting as they become harder to ignore in the world at large.
Yes, and if that's true, then it tells us something important about the relationship between developments in art and conditions in social life.
So are we suggesting that women only get fully into the picture at the end of the 19th century?
Not quite. Exceptional conditions may produce exceptional paintings.
The picture we started with is not in the National Gallery in London. It hangs here in the Pinacoteca in Siena in Italy. It was painted around 1560 and it shows a male artist at work. He's been identified as Bernardino Campi, a painter who came from Cremona. We see him in the act of painting a woman's picture with his hand steadied on his mahl stick while he touches in the detail of her dress. The pose at the easel and the outward stare suggest that this might be a self-portrait. The painter certainly seems to look out from the picture's surface with the kind of attention that we're used to seeing artists devote to their own image in the mirror.
If he's looking out while painting the woman's portrait, wouldn't it be her that he's looking at, rather than his own reflection?
That's true, but to paint this picture I think he'd have had to do both. Let's imagine he begins by painting a picture of the woman. Then he adds in details of the easel and the edge of the canvas. Finally, he uses the mirror in order to paint his own self-portrait in the foreground. And perhaps he then wanted to disguise the fact that it was done from a mirror by making it look as though this was what the female sitter was seeing.
This would suggest that he's showing himself as he imagines she sees him, which would make it a picture by a male artist that constructs a female viewpoint. But all this assumes he painted the picture. In fact, all the evidence is that she painted it.
Her name was Sophonisba Anguissola. She was apprenticed to Bernardino Campi as a young girl, and she became a successful artist in her own right. It seems that this is a painting by her, of her former master painting her picture. The fact that she is the author helps to explain the unusual effect of her presence within the painting. Because what it means is that the painting on the easel is a self-portrait, painted from her own reflection. I suspect that that was what she started with. Then she added in the details of easel and canvas at a slight angle, though preserving the direct outward look of the self-portrait. Then finally she added Campi to the picture, with his slightly off-centre look, suggesting that he is concentrating on the sitter, or perhaps on the very picture she's painting.
So, we've got a portrait by a woman of a man painting her portrait. In other words, she pictures him in the act of picturing her, and she controls the representation of both genders.
What we see here is a single emancipated woman anticipating effects of the very kind that we associate with the beginnings of modern painting some 300 years later. And what lies behind it is an exceptional life. Sophonisba was one of 6 daughters of a liberal father who believed that girls should receive as good an education as boys. So he arranged for her to be trained as a painter, an almost exclusively male profession. She was well known in her own day. She spent some 15 years as court painter in Madrid, and when she left, the King of Spain granted her a life pension in recognition of her achievement. And that was Philip II, who was one of Europe's most influential and discriminating patrons of art.
Yet she's not exactly a household name, is she?
The reason, I think, is that her name was virtually erased from history during the later 18th and 19th centuries.
Given the prevailing assumption that women didn't make good artists, a work with a woman's name on it was an object of little value. Either her paintings were not well looked after, or they were reattributed to other male artists. In some cases, it seems that her signature was literally erased. The body of her work has largely been reassembled in recent years, through work done by feminist art historians. And I'd guess that a painting like this might now be very welcome in the National Gallery, were it available.
It does seem strangely modern. This painting shows a woman stepping across the barrier of the picture plane and claiming the right to represent not just herself, but also her male teacher. What looked like the natural order of things turns out, in this instance, to have been reversed.
Of course, it is an isolated and very extraordinary work. But the lesson it has to offer, I think, is that the entry of women's vision into art can have highly significant effects whenever it may occur, even if it hasn't always been easy for art history to recognise them.
In fact, there's still some remaining doubt about just how this painting should be viewed.
Since we first planned this programme, the painting has been restored. What we can now see is that at some point the position of the left hand was moved from here to there. In its present state, the painting preserves both positions. So what should we conclude? Did the artist at some point change her mind, or was she suggesting that Bernardo Campi had changed his?
The recent cleaning has certainly revealed more of Sophonisba's original work on the dress and on the paintbrush, but it has also left the painting in an unresolved condition. What we have now is probably not the final state as the artist left it. If we return to the painting as we saw it at the beginning of the programme, the different roles of artist and sitter are more clearly established, so that the effect of their reversal is all the more surprising.
We come to paintings with certain conventional expectations. We tend to assume that the male vision is in control.
When this proves not to be the case, we may find ourselves responding and therefore needing to see in a different way. The truly remarkable feature of this painting is the manner in which Sophonisba Anguissola appears to assert her controlling presence.
Languages for holidays. When you're relaxing.
Buenos días.
When you need help.
Ich bin Deutsche.
Soaking up the scenery and culture. Languages for all your travel needs. On BBC Learning Zone, Monday to Friday, 4 a.m. to 5 a.m.
How long do you intend to stay in the UK?
I don't know yet. Hello, your cell phone card.
Pick a card.
Hello, my love. It's Tanya. We're in England. What's wrong with you? Where are you?
Are you a refugee?
A refugee by accident.
Anyone caught trying to escape will be returned. Aloha. Have you ever had a curry?
We have no spoons.
To start a new life,
I always need to be in love.
Get your stuff, I'm getting you out of here.
you have to start your own.
I have to go back.
The award-winning film Last Resort, Wednesday at 9 on BBC Two.
Did you know how easy it is to watch almost all your favourite BBC programmes with subtitles?